All right, so we're here with Witness This, and I've got my brother Rick here with a super cool testimony about how God kind of worked him through some things, per se, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of a life lesson, not a real good life lesson at the beginning of this. It was back in 1989, 1990. I was 19 years old. My dad had a little construction project. He had bought a piece of ground, and we were going to develop his mobile home into a full-blown house with a concrete foundation under it. And he called me up on a Friday and says, I need help. I've kind of tweaked my back, and I need help putting the steel beams up underneath this house and getting them in the concrete wall so we can weld everything down. So I went over that Saturday morning, and I knew I had to be there to help because I was a big boy. I toted 4 50-pound bags of feed over my shoulders at one time, and I was pretty stout, so I was always there for Dad anyway. But we get over there, and we've got the mobile home jacked up, and started putting the beams under. And as we were putting the beam under, the jack blew a seal, and it actually come down and slid over and had smashed Dad between that wall and that mobile home. Now, literally minutes before this happened, I was in that space, and like I said, Dad had tweaked his back a little bit. He was having a harder time pushing those beams than he thought he would have just picking them straight up and setting them in that pocket. Otherwise, he'd have not been in there, and it'd have been me. But we traded places, and I went in there and pushed that beam, and as Dad got between the house and the foundation, that jack blew its seal, and it not only come down, but it slid over. So that wall had him trapped from about his waist down, and it was literally scissoring him in half. Now, as that house come down, I watched it go, and I immediately ran around there to make sure he's okay, and I'm hollering, Dad, you all right? You all right? It wasn't good. It wasn't good. So I, first of all, crawled underneath that home to make sure that Dad wasn't cut in half. After I figured out for sure that it hadn't got him already, I went out and started shoving blocks and timbers and everything between that house. And of course, Dad's screaming. I'd never seen my dad shed a tear in my entire life until that day. And my mom, I hollered at her to call 911, and she come to run around her. I said, look, you don't want to see this. You need to stay on that side of the house. And just call 911. Now, 911 was new. We didn't know if it was going to work. We lived out in the boondocks, and you just a long way from town. So the neighbors that were close enough heard the yelling, and they began to ask questions. And I told one of them, I said, you need to call your husband and have him bring the tractor. This house is smashing my dad. It fell on my dad. So they had CB radios back then. That's the way they talked from farm to farm. So she ran to the house to call and get the tractor over there. In the meantime, I'm trying to do everything I can do to help my dad. And at this point, I've thrown a ladder against the foundation wall and crawled up there because my dad's arms was giving out. And I was actually physically holding him up. To this day, I can still feel the tears as they ran down my back. The sounds that a child should never, or a young man or anybody should ever have to hear from a parent, a loved one of any kind. Now, I was a child that was raised in the church. I had faith. Man, I'd heard all the stories about David and Goliath and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I know what faith can do, and I know that we have a mighty God. And I knew that if I prayed, that God would answer my prayer. Absolutely. Man, I told him, I prayed, I said, God, please don't let my daddy die. God, please help me, let me push this house off of him. Let me get him out of here. You see it all the time today on the internet and on TV. People just lifting up cars, and I had the faith. I went to pushing on that house, and it didn't move. It did not move. And the madder I got, the harder I pushed, and the harder I pushed, the madder I got. The next thing I know, there's a Jackson County Sheriff had come. He was the first one on the scene, and he comes running around there. I'm holding my daddy up, and he says, what can I do? This is the emergency first responder asking me, what can he do?
Right.
You're here to save me, pal.
Right.
Just start shoving stuff between that house, keep it from sliding on over and cutting Dad. You know, this has been 30 minutes since the call went out. And we were looking at probably another 15, 20 before the fire department got to the house.
I'm sure it felt like an eternity.
Oh, you know, time goes so slow when you're in a traumatic situation like that. So I've got a lot of time to think about this process and get mad. Believe me, I was mad. And the fire department finally shows up, and they decide to put these airbags underneath the house and push the house off of them. I was on that ladder still at this point holding my dad up, and Jackson County guy, sheriff guy standing there next to me, and then the paramedic comes up there and he says, boy, he says, you need to come down and let me do my job. I said, no, I ain't leaving my daddy. And he says, you've done everything you can do. He says, now it's my turn. He says, you've done your job, let me do mine. Hardest thing I ever did was climb off that ladder. He jumped up there and got a hold of Dad. I went around to be there so when he come out I could be right there, you know, and as they're blowing up these airbags, it punctured one of them. They didn't have enough airbags then to move that house. The nearest one was in central Jackson County at Blue Springs. That's a good distance from the house, so it's again a 45-minute wait for this replacement airbag. I'm about to blow up, buddy. I am hollering and screaming. I'm mad. I'm mad to the point that I am literally cursing at God. I was mad. I'd lost it. I know people had faith and people can do amazing things with God's power. Why are you leaving me? That was my thought. So the neighbor pulls up with his tractor and he comes running down there and he says, what do you need me to do? I said, I need you to back that tractor down here and pull his house off my daddy. Well, his father was with him too. He heard it on the radio and he showed up. Now, we call him Pawpaw, and he's an older fellow. He's in his 70s, I bet you. But he drove underneath that house like a teenager, dragging a log chain behind him and chucking firefighters out of the way.
You knew exactly what he was doing.
He was going for the frame, buddy. He hooked that log chain up there, and Calvin pulled that tractor off of Dad, and they got him out. And at this point, I'm still hollering and screaming. I mean, I am mad. And Calvin, he comes up and he flat smacked me upside the head and says, you need to shut your mouth and be with your dad and help him out, whatever you do. You need to stop screaming. You need to stop hollering at God. So I get over there to my dad, and they've got him laid out, and they're prepping him. Helicopter comes in and lands across the street there, across the gravel road, and they're prepping him for flight. Through this process of Dad's struggle and being trapped and being in pain, he'd done spit out his false teeth, you know, and he says, I need my teeth. And I'm thinking, Lord Almighty, what do you need your teeth for? You ain't going to beauty contest. So I went and got his teeth, and when I come back, he says, I need some water to rinse my mouth. It's too dry. I can't put them teeth in there. So I went and got some water out of the water tank, and the paramedic, you know, you can't give him that. Well, that Jackson County Sheriff buddy that's been standing there all this time with me, he tells this paramedic, he says, you're going to let him wash out his mouth or I'm going to shoot you myself. He says, I've been watching this boy stand here holding his daddy up. He says, you're going to let him do this. So they let him. They put these pants on him, these funny pants on him, and they blowed him up, blowed up the pants, and put him on this gurney, you know, and they toted him across and chucked him in the helicopter and took him down to Kansas City. That's where he finally ended up. But that process was a whole nother story of trying to get there, because the old boy that took us, he ain't never drove over 45 miles an hour. And I didn't realize that he didn't drive into the city at all. So, needless to say, that was a long trip. But we finally get down there, you know, and they're treating Dad, and I was mad. I was madder than I've ever been in my life, and I guarantee I'll never get that mad again. But I know that was my lowest point in my faith. And I was angry for a long time, and I stayed away from churches because if my God's going to let me do this, how could He let this happen? Why? This is not. You don't leave a person in need like this. And I was angry, and I met a guy several years down the road. We was actually trail riding on horseback, and we got to talking. And he likes horseback riding, obviously, and he was also into dune buggies, and that was another one of my hobbies. So we got to talking and become friends on this trail ride. Through the process of getting acquainted, he asked where I lived, and I told him. And he says, well, I go to church right down the road from your house. I said, really? Yeah, less than 2 miles away. He says, you ought to come to church. And I said, no.
It's not a coincidence.
Yeah. At the time, I didn't see it. At the time, I didn't recognize it, but this is just somebody else wanting me to go to church, and I ain't going. And he's so, well, why ain't you going to church? And I told him the whole story's coming over to the house after church, and we're talking about dune buggies and horses, and he says, you ought to come to church. And I told him, Mick, I'm not going to church. I said, my boys they're learning about Christ, but I got no reason to go to church.
Sure. And
he said, well, how about if my wife comes over next time I come? I said, sure, bring her on over. That's great. Well, the following week, here comes Mick, and he brought his wife. He says, Rick, will you tell her the story about your dad's accident? Well, yeah, I'll tell you about it. And so I went through the whole story, and she says, Rick, that's why you're not going to church? I said, that's why I ain't going to church. He left me high and dry. He didn't answer my prayers when I called on him. And she goes, Rick, you don't understand. He says, let's break this down a little bit. So she says, what was the first prayer that you asked when you went underneath that house to check on your dad? I said, I prayed that they would not let my dad die. She says, did your dad die? I said, no, ma'am, my daddy's doing real good. And she goes, what was the next question that you asked God? I said, I prayed to God that He would give me the power to move that house. And He didn't do it. He didn't do it. She goes, Rick, who told the neighbor to bring the tractor?
Oh, man.
Buddy, you want to talk about feeling about this tall? The years that I was hurt, heartbroken, thinking my Lord left me, thinking that Jesus was too busy to help this guy. And He was right there all along with His hands in it, directing it. You see, too often we get tied up in the moment to think that, man, He's left me. No, He is working it on His plan. His plan is always greater than ours.
Now, don't mean to interrupt, but I'm thinking that there was the compression pants fit into this also, right?
Exactly. She says, Rick, she says, you know what would have happened if you'd have pushed that house off of your dad? I said, well, I'd have got him out. She says, yeah, you'd have got him out a whole lot sooner than the fire department got there, right? I said, yeah. She says, you realize that those pants that they put on your dad, those are compression pants, and they stop the internal bleeding. If I'd have got my dad out of there, he'd have bled to death before the help would have arrived.
It all fell in succession in the way that it should have.
It had to happen that way, and it was my bullheaded, my God's
Sure.
a lot smarter than all of us, but we expect it to be on our terms. His plans are always better than ours. And I didn't know that then. I didn't realize that then. I was expecting, boom, get it done now, but that's not what you get sometimes. Patience, I think, is one of the hardest things that as a Christian we struggle with. But in this lesson that He blessed me with is now that it doesn't matter what storm I go through in my life, I can now look and see God's hand in everything. I hope it ain't that I was so daggone hard-headed that it took something like that. But my dad's still alive. My dad comes
Amazing.
to church here at Paradise Outfitters every Wednesday, and Mama comes, and they're still alive, and they're doing great, and they're living in that house. You know, it was years before I could even go back to that house. I did not get to help finish that house because it was through this process of the accident happening, and then somebody with a whole lot more wisdom than me being able to point out God's hand.
Right.
That I avoided that because I saw it all right there every time I went by, every time I went back there. I could not stop and see my mom and dad. I couldn't be at that location. I live next door now.
That's awesome.
You know?
That's awesome. Well, none of it was coincidental, right? It was just all
God's hand was
divine
in that from the very
intervention,
beginning,
divine
because a
appointments.
lot of things leading up to this, and this will surprise a lot of folks. But Friday night when I was in bed, I woke up Saturday morning and had in my head that I needed to tell my wife that if anything happens, don't worry because I'm okay. Now, I don't know where this come from. I don't know where that thought come from or how it got in my head at that point, but it was something that I was so seriously compelled to tell my wife. Now, for most hillbillies, we don't,
Sure.
we're all in.
Right.
Whatever
Right.
happens, happens.
Sure.
But I was seriously compelled to tell her this, and I don't know where it came from at the time. And I told her that. But when she got to the hospital, finally got to the hospital, she said, I knew you were okay. Because you told me you were going to be okay.
Yeah. Amazing.
And I truly believe that God was trying to prepare me, but I'm slow.
Same here, man. I'm thick.
Ah.
Thick-headed, yeah.
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 But it's a true blessing to be able to share this, and like we talked, man, it's one of those things that God puts struggles in your life not to tear you down, but to build you up. Buddy, there ain't nothing that I can't go through now.
Absolutely.
Ain't nothing.
His ways are not our ways.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
They're much
That's a good
better.
thing, yeah, for sure. So we're at Paradise Outfitters Ministries here in Oak Grove,
Oak
and
Grove.
You guys have a archery range in the back half of the church.
We have an indoor archery range. We do archery leagues. We do center shot archery programs for youth. We've got Hook for Life fishing camp for the young kids in the summer.
Kind of like a vacation Bible
It's like
school.
a vacation Bible school. Yeah.
And then every Wednesday, Thursday, and Sunday, you can find hot food.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We like to eat around here.
Yeah, and you guys do a lot of just outdoor stuff, right? Like hog hunts. And
We've got hog hunts, we've got shotgun Bible studies, we've got bass fishing Bible studies, we've got 3-gun shoot Bible study. We can get around and fish and shoot and hunt and worship God. What's better than that? That's the thing with this wonderful place is we're all outdoorsmen. We've in fact got a car show coming up.
Nice.
They've got a lot of motorheads enthusiasts in here, and we're doing all kinds of things. This has been a true blessing to have this in Oak Grove. We've been here 7 years, and when I walked through the door, there was probably 25 people attending this church because it was just starting here in this location. And 7 years later, in our combined 3 services, we're at over 500 in attendance.
Nice,
Yeah,
man.
tell me
I love
the
it.
Lord ain't working right
Yeah,
here,
for
brother.
sure. That's awesome. Rick, greatly appreciate you sharing your testimony. Hopefully this will help somebody with just realizing maybe I should just kick back a little bit and try to look at it from a 10,000 foot view.
That's it. You take off the blinders. Quit having tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Give yourself a minute, step back from the situation and watch. Don't lose your faith. Don't think that you're walking away from Christ over an issue that He's involved in from the very beginning. It doesn't matter what it is. Your God's not going to leave you. He's going to be there. Now, something I've learned is He'll say, go. He'll say no.
No.
And He'll say slow.
Slow.
So
I like it.
Your time
Gotta go
clock.
slow.
That's it. That's it. Your time clock don't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Your time clock don't matter. It's how God wants it and how Christ's going to work through it. could make it happen.
That's right. Well, that is the kingdom upon us. Rick, thank you so much, brother.
Thank
Greatly
you.
appreciate it.